This is one of my favorite stories on this one. Florida used to have a supplemental academic instruction fund that was given to districts based on whether or not they had to provide summer school and dropout prevention activities. It was a $700 million fund pot that says you'll get money for every dropout and student you need to provide summer school to. Well, that's funding failure. It's kind of a perverse incentive saying, in order to get any of the state money, you have to not do your job throughout the year, and we'll give it to you at the end of the year for all the kids that were unsuccessful. So the Florida legislature really re-engineered how this funding was distributed and allocated it on an FTE basis regardless of performance of students. So school districts in Florida are now allocated this money and said, you first, if you have any schools that are, or any students that are, or schools that are D and F schools, you have to fund and use your resources from the Supplemental Academic Instruction Fund to help these particular schools first. If you didn't have any D and F schools, you could skip to the next one. And it said, if you have struggling third graders who aren't going to be promoted to fourth grade, you then have to use the money to fund those students to make sure that they're reading properly. And then it said, if you don't have a lot of struggling readers and you still have money left over, then you use it to help your dropouts or students that can't pass your 10th grade graduation test. And if you just had a few of those and you had money left over, you could spend it on anything you wanted. So there was much more incentive now to get this state funding to make sure you didn't have any DNF schools, to make sure you didn't have your struggling readers, and to make sure you didn't have any students at risk of dropping out or not passing that high school graduation exam, because then the district had the flexibility to use this pot of money for anything. So they just changed the function of the funding to go from a perverse incentive for funding failure to, if you have a lot of success in your district, you have more flexibility in spending this particular funding. So just a different way of looking at things. There's so many things that we do in education are funded based on things that we don't really want to incentivize, but yet we haven't figured out how to turn that or change that around. Okay, also ensure that funding levels are equitable, ensuring that schools receive at least 85% of the funds that they're generating from the funding formula. So in other words, sometimes schools would receive only, it's like federal tax. You pay up to the federal government. Some of it comes back to the state, but sometimes it's not dollar for dollar. The same thing would happen in Florida schools. And so you would send money up to the state, it would be reallocated or redistributed. They have a provision now that says at least 85% of the funding that the school generates is guaranteed to go back to the school. Sometimes it's more, but it's never ever going to be less. And they also wanted to incentivize principals for spending money efficiently. So we all probably have at some point or another worked in state government where you're really trying to hurry up and spend money by the end of the fiscal year so you don't lose it. There are some provisions put into Florida law now that allows principals to spend more money more efficiently and allowing them to carry it over and use unspent funds following years.